happening now. We'd like to welcome our viewers from across North America and around the world. This is the EdTech Situation Room for December the 11th, 2019. We are in episode 158, and I am being slow because I was looking to make sure my microphone settings were set correctly. This is Wes Fryer coming to you from Oklahoma City, where if you hear various plastic bottles and other things being slung around a room, that would be the new Golden Retriever puppy, which we have creating some chaos and excitement around our house. I am the director. No, I'm not. I am not a director. I am the Technology Integration and Innovation Specialist at the Cassidy School. So for the last 4 years, I've said that D word, but not now. And yes, I'm joined as always by Dr. Jason Neiffer, who I think has made a transition to a tablet world and is in letterbox mode tonight. So we're glad that you're able to join us, Dr. Neiffer, and we're also sorry to hear about your recent injury and changed plan, but happy that you'll be able to, I think, join us next week on regular schedule, much to the disappointment of those in your travel party who are going to Spain.
Yes, yeah, I was prepared to announce this week that I would be missing a couple episodes, or at least if I were going to join in, it might be via 4G networks in Spain, because my wife and I intended to go to Spain for Christmas and had a 2-week trip planned there. But literally moments after we wrapped up last week's broadcast, I walked downstairs in my home and I stepped on a ginormous dog Kong that was not, unfortunately, very foot efficient. So I took a tumble, thought that I just twisted my ankle, and then the next morning found out that I actually broke a couple bones in my 5th metacarpus something or another. So I'm strictly on foot rest for the next month. I guess the upside being that I will be able to attend next episodes of the EdTech Situation Room, but and I will also be able to continue to do my job, which is I am the assistant director and curriculum director of the Montana Digital Academy, the state virtual school located on the University of Montana campus in fabulous and chilly Missoula, Montana. And as usual, Wes and I have put together a whole a ditty of links at our website, www.edtechsr.com, and we have quite a few things to talk about tonight. It is the slowdown of news is starting to happen, as it does in December of every year. The technology is turning more reflective, and it's probably doubly reflective because we're at the end of the 2010s. And I will share an article tonight from The Verge that talks about the best gadgets of the last 10 years. But it'd be really hard to make the argument that the last 10 years hasn't been enormously productive from a technology standpoint. And if you think about that, it was 10 years this coming spring that the iPad was released, you know that it's been an extraordinary decade for technology. So, Wes, where would you like to start us off this evening?
Well, let's let everybody know. I think next week we're going to do our special pre-holiday show to talk a little bit more about gadgets and gifts. So we may go into some IoT things and other such frivolity. So yes, we will be talking as usual about our tech headlines, but we've done that the last couple of years. And anyway, if that's in time for someone to, get some shopping ideas for that special technology loving person in your life, then that is great. Let's see. Let's go to a new section that I titled Tech Cold War. So to give everyone like a little overview, if you're not looking at the show notes for episode 158, we have little headlines over articles, and sometimes it's just one article. But tonight we've got retrospective, ecosystem world, YouTube, Microsoft, Apple, Google, Android tech correction, media literacy, tech Cold War, security, surveillance state, and our geeks of the week. So Alex, I'll take Tech Cold War for $500, but I'm not going to probably ask this as a question. The article, which kind of made me think this is a good little subtitle or headline for a section, was the Guardian article from December 8th, titled, China Tells Government Offices to Remove All Foreign Computer Equipment. And we have been talking on the show for a while about Huawei and the United States. We've talked and the CFO of Huawei that, I mean, I haven't gotten an update, but she was being held in Canada, pending an extradition request from the United States. We've, had these different allegations about how carriers, should not be installing Chinese manufactured Huawei devices for the transition to 5G. In terms of a tech Cold War, that's not just China-U.S., but it's also China, U.S.-Russia. We talked in the past about Kaspersky and the prohibition of using Kaspersky software on all, U.S. military and U.S. government computer systems. So what this article, suggests is that China is going to be spending a lot of money over, the next year or so, and they're going to be trying to have all domestically produced hardware utilized in their government, and then also software. And so this is going to be really interesting from an open source standpoint. We've talked about, I don't know, it was probably over a month ago, where Google decided they're going to, stop updating Android on Huawei devices. And so, can they have their own ecosystem? This is a really big shift in the overall kind of thesis of the internet and having a global network. And that would be that you have interoperability, and, regardless of device, these packets can be, forwarded along. And we've, probably talked in the past about countries like Iran. And I think North Korea is just kind of like cut off from the internet, largely in terms of its civilian population. But Iran is a country that's talked about, just having its own network, closing off, the world, and having its own intranet. Last week we talked about the Russian president Putin's announcement that they were going to make their own, version of Wikipedia. So I think this just sounds pretty yucky overall from a global communication, internet networking standpoint. But I think it's a sign of the times. And I guess one of my connections to the classroom would be, we need students today we live in politically polarized times. We're not a political show, but we need students to understand the hostility. And even though it's not necessarily a hot shooting war, between the U.S. and China and between the U.S. and Russia, there are, huge digital cyber operations underway today. There have been. It's just a continuing war. And so this article uses the terms, tech Cold War to refer to what's happening between China and the United States. So what is your take, Dr. Neiffer?
Well, I read this article with a lot of interest, in part because the hardware part I get. I don't really know what the alternatives are for Microsoft Windows, because my guess is the article refers to the fact that most of the hardware that's available is designed around the Windows operating system. The one exception to that, of course, is Mac-based machines, and I guess Chrome OS is technically an alternative here. But the problem with that, of course, is the fact that it's developed by United States vendor Google, that has had a bumpier relationship with the government of China. But I'm reminded of the decision of the city of Munich in 2003 to dump all Windows machines and go with Linux and open source operating systems. And that actually that has in just the past couple of years reverted back to Windows, because the satisfaction by Munich government workers and officials was lower than they had expected. But I was just looking a couple of minutes ago, and there are major Chinese-backed Linux distributions, many of which this particular one I'm looking at right now is called Kylin. It's developed by the National University of Defense Technology in People's Republic of China, and they're apparently continuing to actively develop that particular software. It's interesting to me, of course, that they might be developing a software alternative to that. And the one thing I guess I would say in from my own experience is that one of the things that's absolutely true that it wasn't true maybe 15 years ago is that the web is now good enough to be an efficient platform for most tasks on its own, right? The web-based properties, web-based software is, in my humble opinion, more than good enough to suffice to replace desktop alternatives. And so if China wants to go in that direction and largely use a Linux-based operating system as a terminal server, basically, terminal to get onto the internet, which is where much of that power would exist, I think is super interesting. One of the things I think we've loosely referred to on this show, and it does threaten the worldwide universality of the internet, is that we're starting to get to a point where there are separate internets in different geopolitical regions, right? Russia has effectively its own internet, not just because it has alternatives to Western software like Microsoft software, Google software, but also there are networks in the so-called Russian internet that are not accessible by Western IP addresses. The same is true of China. The same is true of some Middle Eastern countries like Iran. And, part of the promise, right, part of the broad dream of the internet was that it would open up the world, right? It would give people access to communication they otherwise wouldn't have because traditional systems were so walled off. And here we are now walling off systems again. So obviously there's a huge financial impact to this, to major Western vendors of technology. But it also, I think, philosophically is putting kind of a nail in the coffin of some of the idealism that came with the early internet 15, 20, 25 years ago. And maybe it also means that the tech correction means more than just, social media changing its tune in regards to how it interacts with our lives.
And I think it's important for us to help students have a basic understanding of how the internet works, right? How does TCP/IP work? What does it mean to have net neutrality? The idea that packets are, transferred in this network, and they don't have necessarily defined paths. And as the internet was originally designed, you have intelligence at the edges, rather than inside the network. And so, that's probably things that students are going to get, in a computer science class. You wonder, how the thing is, one of the reasons that literacy is important, not just for, folks who are going to code and take a computer science class, it's because of the policy implications, right? The citizenship implications. Representatives need to understand how the internet works, because if they're going to regulate things, there's potential for things to get broken. And I think where I might have in the past had, more concern thinking about corporate interests and whether, companies that imposed a quality of service sort of restriction, like, if a cable company or other ISP was going to favor packets for like their streaming video services over others, and how that was going to maybe not break the internet, but, be bad. What did I read today? That are there like 1.2 billion people in China or something? There's a lot of folks in China. And I don't know that we've got the articles in here. As far as I've been listening to the daily podcast and the revelations coming out about the oppression of the Uyghur Muslim minority in China. They've had a big leak of documents, and there was a person whose mother was actually interviewed, and just the scale of oppression and surveillance there, and the degree to which their values, breach from ours, or they diverge from our Western values in terms of freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, all these kinds of things. These are all, tied in together. And so I do agree when you talk about initial optimism about the internet and about how all this was going to, bring us together and, allow for the free distribution and sharing of ideas, but hopefully the liberalization of, governments and regimes, which, might be oppressive, might not be as embracing of liberal democracy and sort of, universal declaration of human rights kinds of values. I think all of this, doesn't bode exceptionally well. So where else would you like to go this wonderful evening? By the way, what's the temperature tonight in Missoula? Is it cold?
It's not cold yet. It will be. There's a cold front coming in. I know that I was talking to some folks from Coeur d'Alene this afternoon. They said it was raining and sleeting there, which means it's 33 now. It'll get down to 26 tonight, and then by middle of next week, our lows will be in the single digits. So
there you go. Winter is on its way.
White Christmas a-coming. So, well, let's get some of these other bummer articles out of the way. before we kind of jump into the lighter tech stuff. Great New York Times article on December 6th about, and I put this under tech correction, that despite the fact that this has been a well-known problem for years now, you can still go and buy clicks and likes and followers on social media. And this expose by Davey Alba talks about how many of the corruption, maybe anti-manipulation strategies that big social media tech has been trying to push into place have not been successful, and you can still go out and buy likes on social media. And I think we're really at a point where, and I was thinking about this earlier, like ways that things like this have made so much of the promise of the internet a falsehood. This notion that there will be crowdsourced taxonomies that we could help organize the internet, and that people would be able to organize this as a kind of a large herd together. That idea is not completely dead, but in a world where we are utilizing metrics of social media in order to rank things for whatever reason or in whatever way can be manipulated by people that are taking cash to utilize the click farms, server farms to be able to manipulate those statistics. We have a long way to go before we can trust those things. And again, we talk about this in the podcast as part of the tech correction, but we are in an era right now where we have to consider whether or not the strategies we are using or have been using over time are still effective. And so as an example of this, it's behind a very significant wall, so it's hard to know how this impacts this. But if I can go buy 100 clicks on my Instagram post, why is it that I can't go buy 100 boosters of my website to get it higher up on a search engine? I know that the magic of so-called search engine optimization, SEO as it's called, a lot of people think it's fake, a lot of people think it's real. You can buy services that help you do this, but in a more gray market or black market way, can you spend $500 and get your website to rocket up to the top of common search terms? So again, reader, surfer, beware, but that is still a phenomenon here in 2019.
So I just dropped a link in on the same headline of tech correction, kind of related. This was a BuzzFeed article from December 10th. Exclusive: Facebook fired a contractor who has paid thousands in bribes to reactivate banned ad accounts. The amount of manipulation that is continuing for social media, not only, buying clicks and things like that, but, creating false accounts and, utilizing this incredible targeting, which has really is unprecedented, right? We've never in the history of the planet had the ability for an advertiser who can basically be anyone, right? You or I can go on Facebook and buy ads. I bought ads. In fact, I boosted our last podcast for, I think I paid like $15 just to kind of see, but you can specifically target, and I did, different countries and people who are interested in education and technology and things like that. So, I'm glad to see Facebook taking action here, but we have very little to no regulation in this space. So there's really not government folks involved in the United States. And this is what we've talked about before with the GDPR, the General Directive on Privacy Regulation. Is that right? A European privacy law, something like that. It's
something like that, yeah.
Take our word for it. It's the GDPR. Anyway, they are in some ways, further ahead of us in the United States in terms of trying to advocate for privacy law. But yeah, it's a wild west out there. And, while it may sound encouraging that some actions are being taken, we really don't have any idea, or certainly a clear idea as people on the outside, of the scale of these kinds of issues and, how difficult it is, but just also, how big the problem is. Let's pick up another, I think I put it under Tech Cold War article. So we did the China article from The Guardian telling government offices to remove foreign computer equipment. Here is the FCC. This is from Wired. their latest issue, I guess, the December 12th issue, the FCC's push to purge Huawei from U.S. networks. And part of the difficulty here, and I think they specifically cite, rural, cooperatives and ISPs and carriers. Huawei's got some relatively inexpensive stuff. And so what we're trying to do as a country, I say we, the United States, is we're, in the midst of a transition to a 5G standard, which is going to be dramatically faster for everybody, right? What I've read indicates that, students and or teachers bringing a 5G device to our campus today, might have more bandwidth available on their device than we have for the entire network. I mean, it's a huge leap forward. But what the FCC is trying to do is to have a ban. Well, they've announced big investments, but they are pushing that everyone cut Chinese equipment out. And so the rural carriers struggling to be profitable, have in the past bought Huawei and ZTE tech equipment because they were cheap. And so, rural carriers are saying they've never had cybersecurity issues. Why are they doing that? When it comes to anything involving national security, we never have the whole picture, right? There's classified levels of things, and we'll be able to glimpse into what is happening, but there's going to be a bigger picture that those that have classified security clearances have that we don't have. So it's interesting because the U.S. federal government hasn't come out, and also, I guess, when it comes to cyber, right, if you admit all of the things that then that might let your adversaries know what you know and perhaps how you know them and all of this kind of stuff. So there's a lot of things that are kind of hidden here. But basically, the U.S. is convinced that there's either active, operations today, or there's potential for these Chinese manufactured devices to be utilized, frankly, and I'll be cynical here, frankly, in the same way that we've seen the U.S. government operate, and that's part of what the Snowden disclosures, revealed, was that we had these massive taps on the internet pipes that came in and went out from the United States, I think on either coast. And so then the NSA, the National Security Agency, is able to take that, and if it's not encrypted data, or if they can break the encryption, they can sniff it and listen to it. So I don't know. I can't say right now what my recommendation is on a policy basis, but again, it points to the new tech Cold War, and I think this is the new normal, and I don't think that's part of the lexicon or the jargon or the vocabulary, or it's not in the curriculum, right? If you've got a textbook today, it doesn't say, and the new tech war or the new tech Cold War that's broken out, between the United States and China and Russia. And so this is just sort of another sign of the times of the tech Cold War. When you were in Costa Rica, Jason, didn't you pick up some Huawei handsets and check them out?
That you? I did. Yeah, it was. That's exactly what I did. And the Huawei brand name has been interesting to me. I'm an Android guy, right? So I like to look at the Android phones. And Huawei had some really amazing, what we would call flagship phones in the United States parlance for cell phones that were substantially less. Oftentimes they weren't intended for the U.S. market, so they may or may not work on all networks here, or they would have kind of less coverage than one made for the United States network. But I was in a Walmart in Costa Rica, and they had an electronics section that actually looked closer, if you've been into an electronics section of a Sam's Club or a Costco, it looked closer to that than it did like the electronics section of a typical Walmart in the United States. And as it turns out, 80% of the cell phones there were a couple of brand names I had not heard of before that I had to look up. There were a couple of third or fourth, maybe C or D level brand names for cheaper phones. And then there was a ton of Huawei phones, and they were popular. They were reasonably priced, and they had statistics that would have, the phone itself cost $200 or $300, that for similar innards, similar tech innards would be something that would be closer to $800 or $900 in the United States market. And, a interesting phenomenon there, but, the fact that some international brands are probably going to end up being not international brands, really regional brands, not because of the quality of the equipment or the reach of the company, but rather because of geopolitical pieces. That's a little, it's interesting. It certainly goes against, I think, where these technologies are more broadly going.
One more quick article on this topic, and then we can turn to something more optimistic, positive, and kumbaya. This is Time from September 26th. This is an article by Richard Stengel, and the title is, "We're in the middle of a global information war. Here's what we need to do to win it." I actually listened to this over the weekend on Pocket, which, as an aside, if you're not doing that, that is a really fantastic thing to be able to save articles to either read later, absent all of the ads and distractions, or tap on the little headphone icon and listen to it. And it also will tell you how many minutes it's going to take to listen to it, which is pretty cool. Stengel was a U.S. representative, a diplomat. He was Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy for 3 years in Russia, and he is recounting, interactions that followed the invasion of Crimea and the ways in which, Russian officials were engaging in cyber operations against the United States there, and in the way that they've ramped up. So, anyway, it is. It's a dangerous world out there, kids, and the technology tools are being used. I would say, I don't know how you weigh this, but they're a huge part of the ways in which nation states are actively engaged in warfare and politics, right? Doesn't Sun Tzu say the war is the extension of politics by other means? No, was that Clausewitz? Hey, I don't know. Sun Tzu was about converting wills. I think that was what Clausewitz said. Anyway, those of you that are better on your military theory can, correct me there. But the point is, we have lots of different ways that we try to affect and influence the actions of others, and cyber plays a huge role in that. So, thoughts on that, or would you like to go ahead and take us to other articles, Jason?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm going to add much more to that. So let's go ahead and maybe pivot to some of the kind of ecosystem world this week. Let's start maybe with Google. A couple of interesting things from the Google world this week. First, Chrome, the newest version of Chrome, which I believe is version 80 of the Chrome browser. This includes Chrome OS, now tells you if you have a stored Google password that is in a compromised database somewhere. And this is actually a follow-up of an article we talked about several weeks ago, where there's now a password check process where you can go in and have Google check all of your passwords for the purpose of looking at compromised password databases to see if that username and password appears in any way, shape, or form there. And now it goes ahead and tells you that the username and password that you're using for a website that you're getting into is a compromised one. And as it turns out, I found this out myself. A couple of weeks ago, I logged into a website I hadn't been in for some time. I was utilizing a username and password that was kind of a standard one, a process I no longer utilize. I have unique passwords for all of the websites I utilize now, and doubly so for the ones that are school related, that have student data in them. And as it turns out, that username and password I utilized to get in that site had been a compromised one. And so it's a great security piece. Obviously, there is some controversy because some people don't like the fact that Chrome has the ability to save usernames and passwords, and instead you should be utilizing a third-party password manager. But I do think the value add of looking at the databases is both pretty interesting and an amazing functionality for the Chrome browser.
It also points to how vital it is that all of us protect our passwords for our Gmail and Google accounts with the most secure multi-factor methods we can, which we'll preview my Geek of the Week that I'll talk about, which involves a bequest to Santa. I think there's something really powerful about seeing that personalized.
Yeah.
And it's one thing because I've used this and shown people this with Have I Been Pwned, this list of breaches. But when you are looking at the specific password and it's telling you how many duplicates you have, you've used the same password on this many, websites, and this many, this many accounts, they're on the dark web. If you're continuing to use that password and you're thinking it's effective at all, especially against automated hacks, which are increasingly prevalent, I think it's a real it's a powerful tool. And let me just give this to everyone as homework, okay? If you're listening to the EdTech Situation Room, Wes is giving you holiday homework this year. And your holiday homework is to go in and utilize either this password security check inside Chrome. If you're using any kind of password manager, LastPass, 1Password, they call them different things. I think 1Password calls it like Watchtower, but it's the same sort of thing where it's going to compare your usernames and passwords to these known breaches that are out there, and it's going to tell you the ones to fix. And so this is what we all need to do. We obviously should do it ASAP, but we have our lives. So do a little bit at a time, a few each week. Sit down over the holidays and do this. This is like spring cleaning. This is like changing the batteries in your fire fire alarms. You've got to change filters in your HVAC system. Like there's stuff that you do because you're a homeowner and you want to be safe. We are all stewards of a digital life that we have with all of these accounts and all of these passwords and things like that. And so, this is a two-parter. Go in and change your passwords, because I'm giving myself this homework. I've already started it, but I need the encouragement to finish it. I think you're definitely further along with this than I am, Jason. And then also have the conversation with your family members. Have it with parents, have it with siblings, have it with your children, because protecting our passwords, avoiding identity theft, and trying to make ourselves a less vulnerable target for those who would want to, at worst, just sell our accounts to somebody, and, at worst, break into our lives and significantly disrupt them by, accessing our bank accounts or doing, other kinds of malicious things. These are realities. It's not just, I don't have a tinfoil hat on as I, share this with you right now. This is stuff that we need to take seriously, and it's not just something for the geeks. This is something for everybody, because we all have these accounts. So /rant over.
Great. Well, and one other quick piece of Google news. Google has announced that the end of Google Glass is here. So they will no longer be updating the Google Glass platform. This does not include the more industrial Google Glass that had been released a couple years back. That will continue to receive updates, although my understanding was that Google Glass was extremely expensive and included the promise of several years of updates. But I don't know if we've ever really talked about Google Glass on this podcast, because it was the phenomenon was passed before we started our broadcasting back in 2016. But Wes, did you ever own Google Glass?
No, Felix Giacomino loaned me a set that I got to borrow for a while, but I don't know if that's because of my glasses or whatever, but it was something that I tried a little bit, but it was really just kind of a cool thing to, say, yeah, I've tried that. But how about you? Did you? I don't think you were a buyer. Were you?
No, I never owned a pair. I borrowed a pair over a weekend once to play with, and then like every tech conference, there's two kinds of people at tech conferences during the Google Glass era. There was the people that brought a pair to share with everyone, and then there are people that brought pairs there just to use, and they were a little bit outliers because they were, and there was nothing really consistent about that crew other than to say that it did seem to erect some barriers, right? Like, despite the fact it was a relatively minor piece of hardware, I felt like it was a barrier to talk to people. It didn't invite a conversation, instead it blocked people, because oftentimes they would be interacting with their glass as opposed to interacting with you. But considering how, that was the thing, right? And how a lot of tech pundits and frankly the mainstream media jumped on top of that as a, this is the future and the future is now. I'm convinced that a wearable that has a vision component to it is still very much in the realm of possibility, but it's probably going to look more Star Trek-y with some kind of contact or lens or something that's very, very, very minimalized, as opposed to the Google Glass, which, frankly wasn't that heavy of a piece of hardware, but still seemed to at least elicit some response from people.
I'll see if I can find the link to this and put it in our show notes. But the coolest virtual field trip I saw with Google Glass was a teacher who was in CERN in Switzerland, which is like the particle accelerator. And, somehow, and whatever, with connectivity, and, he obviously had a lot of help, but, wandering around, showing everybody who, was watching, look at this, and I'm seeing this, and isn't this incredible? And so anyway, I think probably GoPro cameras and, the head mounts that those have, and the ways that skiers and snowboarders and people like that's a little bit more the way that, first person, see what I see, right. Videography is being done. And yes, it is this massive, massive camera that you've got strapped to your head. So,
well, one thing I would say, it's interesting that has taken off as its own category platform, because the camera component of Google Glass was part of what was so controversial about Google Glass. The fact that people can instantly record a video with a camera that was propped to their head, that didn't go well for some folks, and lots of claims and bans of Google Glass in theaters and in locker rooms and in gyms, and that the GoPro is really the application that survives, because we really don't have smart tiny displays yet that are shooting beams into eyes.
Yeah, it makes me think. I wonder, did anybody ever walk into a bar, wearing their snowboarding helmet with the GoPro, on top, and face an angry crowd that was like, "You're not gonna live stream this." I mean, anyway, it's just the benefit of that from a privacy standpoint is that it's not minimal. It's glaringly obvious if you've got something like that strapped to your head. So it's interesting to see how that continues to develop. I'm sure on the spy side, right? The James Bond, not just like the James Bond fans, but those that are involved in real spy activities. It's probably a little surprising how small things can be. I have a friend who was stationed in Moscow, and anyway, it was an interesting couple years, having his house bugged, knowing that everything they said was being recorded and possibly, videoed, things like that. So that technology certainly marched on. But in terms of a consumer product, I think the outrage that people have from a privacy standpoint will probably limit the broad adoption of technologies like that. Yep. Can we do some Apple
please. Actually, that's where I was going to ask you to go next. So, Wes, has something recently been released from Apple?
Yeah, so Mac rumors on December 10th. And of course, journalists love these kind of headlines, right? But it's kind of crazy. A maxed out MacBook Pro will cost over $52,000. And then I think you dropped this one in from The Verge, same date, December 10th. The Mac Pro's optional wheels cost $400. And, before I just give you the impression that I think it's totally ridiculous, let's remember not that long ago, and aren't you, Jason, the proud owner of a trash can Mac Pro, or did you?
No, I never bought one. I wanted to really badly. I did buy a cheese grater Mac Pro in 2008 that survived until I kind of moved on from it in 2015-ish, but it was a good faithful servant for 7 years.
So that cheese grater, Mac is really kind of the grandfather, I think, of this new Mac Pro. So I remember, lamenting on the show, probably, more than a year ago, what about the Pro? Is Apple, abandoning them? So I think it's great. This is a reminder, though, that this Pro level is not for schools. It's not for the faint of heart or the folks that don't have tons of disposable income. But for those that need tons of horsepower, I've referenced this before, but when I was at Texas Tech in the early 2000s, Apple, had the Mac Pro G4, and they ran this ad campaign because it had been classified as a weapon by the Department of Defense or Homeland Security, whatever we called it at that point. And so it had export restrictions because it was so powerful, right? And so it's pretty amazing now to think about, computational power and, if indeed quantum computing is happening and has been, we've had that breakthrough. I mean, part of what they've said with that is that's going to render perhaps all forms of encryption that we have today moot, because these computers are going to be so powerful and so fast, they're going to be able to decrypt basically anything that is a mathematical algorithm.
Right.
So anyway, I will not be shopping for these. Jason, let's just do the educational question. Do you think we have any educational institutions anywhere that might be, able to purchase and working in this Pro line of the new Mac Pro?
Sure. What the headlines leave out that I think is the important headline here is not that the most expensive Mac Pro is $52,000. And looking at the hardware, it's not quite worth it. You're definitely paying an Apple premium there for that if you start to compare similar hardware on the PC side. And by the way, the $52,000 Mac has 1.5 terabytes of RAM. Right? Like, whereas there are still computers being sold today that have 2 gigabytes of RAM, this has 1,500 megabytes of RAM, right?
Gigabytes is a terabyte.
Oh, excuse me, like gazillions, right? Like lots of megs. But the point being that that it's a ridiculous computer, and I have seen articles defending both the cost of the $52,000 computer, and also there are applications, many of them in, for example, the high-end CGI or animation world, where the time saved by buying the 1.5 terabyte RAM is worth it, because it's time savings, and also Apple treats the $52,000 customers really well. Something goes wrong, they'll send a technician in to fix it, right? These comes with service agreements that are quite extraordinary. In my mind, I think the biggest disappointment here is not the higher end, it's the lower end. And to get the lowest level Mac is $5,200. That is without the premium monitor that has the $1,000 stand that comes with it. This is just the computer itself. And one of the things I really liked about the cheese grater Macs, the Mac Pros pre-trash can Macs, was that you could buy one for $1,200, $1,500 that was relatively low in spec, and then over time upgraded as you had time and need. And those computers were infinitely serviceable. You could literally, like with my Mac Pro, my home Mac Pro, I replaced the spinning hard drives with SSD drives, and then I replaced the SSD drives with a rated SSD drive that ran super fast. In fact, I had to take it in to get a fan serviced in the Apple Store in Spokane. At that point, I was running four small SSD drives in a RAID 0 configuration. So super, 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 super fast. And the guy there ran tests on the drive and said, I've never seen a drive this fast in a Mac Pro before. This is awesome, man. And it was really interesting and cool. But I wish Apple had come up with it couldn't have been $1,200. I mean, that was 10 or 12 years ago when I bought the lower end Mac. But they could have come up with a $2,500, $3,000 Mac Pro that could have had user updatable parts in it to allow what is widely referred to as the prosumer market wrapped up. And if that Mac had been released, 5 or 6 years ago, I might have stuck on the Mac platform. But the fact that they didn't have a competitive desktop that had the high-end components in it, and that they were sticking with the Mac Mini as the desktop of choice for home users, I think that's a real mistake. And so, no, I don't really think there's going to be a lot of schools that maybe universities with CAD departments, with art, digital art departments, I could see them maybe going in that direction, because you can get 5, 6, 7, 8 years out of it, but it's priced too high.
Here's the market for this, and it's Pixar, and it's anybody engaged in super complicated rendering. I'll just jump to, I was just inspired to drop it in as a second geek of the week, the science of Pixar. Okay, this is a fantastic science museum traveling exhibit. When I went out to Denver, Colorado in October and visited our son, participated in a fun design sprint that Dr. Scott McLeod put together. My son and I went to the Denver Museum and saw it. And the website has, I don't know if it's comprehensive, but has a lot of elements. It's incredible. It is all about, it should be called not just the science of Pixar, but the science, the coding, and math of Pixar, right? Because, Toy Story, was that like 20 years ago? I mean, it's kind of incredible. It's happened so quickly. But from Toy Story to the latest Pixar creations, it reminds me a little of Star Wars, right? When George Lucas, 1976, Episode 4, A New Hope. I mean, the scenes and the ways in which they had actual models, and I mean that was really cutting edge stuff. But even when you look to the Return of the Jedi and the numbers of simultaneous spacecraft and spaceships that were shown. And today, what's possible is unbelievable. But it takes tons and tons of time to and processor cycles, really, is what we should say, because the time is based upon how fast the computer is. So, a 1.5 terabytes of RAM, for a Pixar animator is going to be, put to good use. In fact, they have banks and banks of computers that I think they call it the render farm. And so when they create something, they'll send it there, and there'll be, partial renders that they'll use as they're storyboarding things out. And I'm trying to think of what you call the, there's a word for, the partial, the movie that has different storyboards and things like that. But until it fully gets fleshed out, it's just incredible. And some of the statistics that they had in this, science of Pixar display, talking about how many hours it took, when they were doing Toy Story versus, the number of characters and objects and the complexity. So probably not going to see that coming to a school near you. But hey, the fact is, a relatively reasonable, quote unquote, processor with 4 or 8 gigs of RAM, that can last you, I think, for a long time. And yeah. I'm definitely enjoying, stepping up from the very thin A7 base, or what was it, M7? It was like an iPad processor and a very thin MacBook, and that was my daily carry for at least 3 years. And so, I've actually moved to a Pro, and I've enjoyed the horsepower there. But it's for what a lot of us do day in and day out, using the web as our platform, processing information, accessing information, creating things that are not super heavy in terms of the video rendering that they take, or the CAD. It's we're all able to use fairly lightweight hardware in terms of the hardware requirements. So it is good to see Apple taking care of the pro user, because if they don't, then Windows is the only available option, or Linux, of course. So I think as a Mac aficionado, publicly, not hiding that fact here on the show, I'm glad to see them taking care of the pro market, but don't anticipate to be touching one of these myself anytime soon.
Yep, absolutely. Well, let's do a couple of quick Microsoft articles. We mentioned this last time, that Microsoft, a reminder that Windows 7 for Microsoft is end-of-lifing in January. And if you are still running Windows 7, you're going to start to get full screen upgrade prompts next month. And my guess is that will probably come with a free opportunity to upgrade to Windows 10 directly if your computer can handle Windows 10. But remember, the risk here is that you stop getting security updates if you are a typical Microsoft consumer. And I have to say, I know there's been some shenanigans regarding updates and such but I honestly believe that Windows 10 is an infinitely better operating system than Windows 7, which hasn't really been actively developed for the past 5 years. So Windows 10 beats it out, so you'll start getting those notifications.
And a quick thought on this: I listened to the latest Security Now podcast either over the weekend or last week, I guess, and they talked about how, yes, Windows 10 is a great step forward, but basically it means perennial instability because of new updates and new refreshes. This is the new normal. And where enterprise customers might be used to saying, okay, we've shifted to, Windows XP or Windows 7, and now we got it locked down and we got it stable and we got it, Windows 10, I think because the computing environment continues to just be this cat and mouse security vulnerability, 0 days, constant patching. It's a different environment, and I don't know. I think that we're going to see the emergence at the enterprise level, especially with virtualization. With some more terminal-based, what is it called? When you've got essentially terminals that are going through the cloud. My brain is not working, but I think we're gonna continue to see some alternatives, especially with updates happening more like an app store kind of update, and because of security is going to continue to be a good big driver there. What else for Microsoft?
Well, The Verge reported on December 5th that Microsoft is starting to push out design guidelines for its new, I don't have to really describe it other than say it's framework for design. It's called Fluent Design, and you've probably heard me talk about in the past, if listeners to the podcast know that I'm really into material design, which is the design language that Google uses for its apps, but it doesn't look all that different. It actually is a very flat style design, which material design is as well. But you're going to start to notice that probably other apps will design the Fluent Design language on both its Android and its iOS apps. And remember, Microsoft isn't a mobile phone operating system owner, right? They've decided to go all in on all mobile operating systems, really, but with a specific focus on Android. But their apps do look very similar across their entire architecture. So if you're looking at mobile Word in iOS and mobile Word in Android, they look very similar. And it's interesting to see that Microsoft, the strategy of theirs to just abandon its mobile aspirations to focus on what Android could provide it as a platform is super interesting. And then go ahead, Wes.
Nope. Go ahead. That's right.
One last note. I thought this was interesting just because it shows you the real shift at Microsoft over the last 5 or so years. But the first Microsoft app is available on Linux. It's the Microsoft Teams app, which is their collaboration software suite. It's part of Office 365, and it's now available as a native Linux app.
Wow. Miguel Gulen, shout out to you. I'm going to tweet that at Miguel. Can you tell us about this Amazon or Apple family article from the New York Times? And are you going to allow yourself to be defined in such a binary way?
Well, see, that's what's the interesting part of the article, right? So first of all, to be clear, this is an older article, and I heard this referred to on last week's This Week in Tech, and I heard it, or actually I saw the article referred to in another article I was reading later, and I was like, well, this really did strike a chord with me. But this article was released after Amazon released their large horde of new products this year, and they were kind of making fun of the fact that we're talking about it was 70 products that Amazon released, but we are starting to get to a point because of the ecosystem thing, right?
And by the way, this is New York Times, March 9th. Are you an Amazon or Apple family? That's the headline.
Yep. And what's happening is that because these systems don't work very well together, with one another, right? And instead work with all the equipment inside the ecosystem, slowly and surely consumer households are becoming really, we use the term walled gardens here a lot, but it's a walled garden of one ecosystem over another because they just don't work very well across ecosystems. So if you're an Apple family, and having been an Apple guy for a long time. I can tell you that stuff always works amazingly well together. But in the same way that Apple stuff works well together, if you throw in an Android phone into it, or a Windows computer, or try to shake up the operating system, suddenly the crossover to be able to have these parts work together dramatically decreases. And suddenly now incompatibilities surface. And Amy Webb in this New York Times article talks about that one of the problems with this is that one of these two ecosystems, Apple or Amazon, is headed towards kind of higher end users, and one of the ecosystems is very much headed towards more budget conscious ecosystems, and it's going to start to turn into, as she calls it, a digital caste system, because it's different families are going to either have access to the high end stuff or not. And we've talked about this in the past too, in regards to you can pay for a better internet. That's kind of what is starting to happen, that people are exchanging money to get rid of advertising driven internet, which makes the internet essentially better, less advertising, less intrusive data issues, less trading your data for income. And that's going to create, lots of interesting phenomenon, right? But one of the things that could happen here is that there's kind of different levels of technology worlds. If you can afford the great one, it's going to be a better experience. But if all you can afford is the budget one, it's still going to work together. It's just not going to be a great experience. So, Wes, I would say that my family, not necessarily because of cost, but because of factors of the different platforms we support, it's become a bit of an Amazon family. That's what our stuff runs on Amazon in our house. And where are you at the Casa de Fryer?
We are the Google and Apple Home. So, Google Wi-Fi, Google smart speakers. We're doing some dabbling in the IoT world with some Apple HomeKit compatible, Apple Watch, compatible devices. And I will say it's pretty nice to be able to just, tap right there on the watch and have magical things happen. So I told my wife the other day to forego, purchasing the Echo Show. What does Google call their screen for the kitchen smart speaker?
It's the home something. I can't remember what it is.
Yeah, it's the kitchen screen, the home screen. It's the smart speaker with a screen. Anyway, that was, we didn't need to spend on that. We're gonna have to do Geeks of the Weekend a little bit. We started a couple minutes late. I'd like for you to do that YouTube clarity article, but let me skip down really quickly to a couple other security articles. So I thought this one was, speaking of IoT, very interesting. CNET, December 6th, 2019. FBI recommends that you keep your IoT devices on a separate network. And as a tech director, this is something that we, have been implementing in the last couple of years. We have Wi-Fi clocks. We have Wi-Fi thermostats. In fact, we've had those for years. And so, rather than just have everything together on the same network, that article talks about, if somebody gets access to your IoT devices, you don't want them to be able to have access to everything else that you have, on your home network. And then I also dropped in this article. This is also older. This is from February, but it relates to my main Geek of the Week. This is from The Verge on February 22nd, 2019. The best hardware security keys for two-factor authentication. And so security has been something we continue to talk about and harp on. And so this was a recommendation at that time, that's almost a year old, of what kind of physical keys that are recommended for doing your multi-factor. So your thoughts, Jason, on separate network for IoT? Are you living that? And can we do that with Google Wi-Fi? I haven't even tried that yet.
I think you could set it up as the guest network, right? As long as the guest network didn't require you to sign in, it was just a separate username and password. But the problem with that is, of course, that I think the guest network walls things off from other devices on the guest network, right? So that, I think that could be an issue. But yeah, I have not considered this myself. I have the equipment sitting in the basement. It would be hard for me to pull this off to create a second network. But it is, when the FBI is saying that, that's not based on conjecture. They know something.
It's not Tom's Guide or some Yahoo. This is the FBI.
Yeah.
Which by
Yeah.
the way, still recommends that we cover our webcams, right?
Yeah, and in fact, because of their recommendation, I do that myself on any sensitive webcam I happen to be using. But yeah, exactly, right. So it's not something I am doing yet, but I will say the article maybe do a double take.
How about that YouTube stuff on the FCC's guidelines?
Yeah, so this is a follow-up from something we've talked about, I think, for a couple weeks now. But YouTube has announced a bunch of changes because of COPA, which is the Child Online Protection Act, and they paid a very large fine, I think it was back in August or September, and then promised to create new rules in regards to content that was primarily aimed at kids. When we say kids, we mean 13 and under in this context. And there was a big hubbub because the new rules were not accepted very pleasantly by a lot of the YouTube faithful, who felt like that they were hazy enough and had a little too much risk without much in return. And as it turns out, YouTube itself is now asking the FTC for more clarity about how they will enforce COPA in regards to platforms like YouTube.
Because a lot of creators, and I've had my 5th and 6th graders, more of my 6th graders tell me about this, they see this as Armageddon. I mean, this is going to be the end of monetization for many channels, because if they are having a lot of young people connect, then I think the guideline is they can't monetize that. Is that correct? If you're creating for kids? Yeah.
Well, it's not even if who's even connecting. If the content is aimed at or is perceived to be aimed at kids, then monetization is taken away, and then also analytics is taken away. And it seems at face value to be well, fine, it's aimed at kids, so you shouldn't be able to get the data because COPA says you can't, and we should be careful about monetization. But remember, a lot of YouTube creators, that monetization is the funding that helps support the content in that channel. And I know of channels that aren't aimed at kids at all, but are like, I have a friend who has a crafting channel, and based on the extremely hazy way that both the FTC and then ultimately the YouTube interpreted the FTC rules, felt like that they could have their monetization.
So here's a crazy idea. Are we going to have a race to the bottom where, creators are going to have to use profanity and make their shows immature, to just prove that they're not targeting, kids in order to monetize? I mean, what's going to happen? I mean, I don't think we know. And like I said, some of my more YouTube savvy middle schoolers are pretty convinced, I think, based on the YouTubers that they follow, that this is just going to be devastating to the creator community.
Yeah, absolutely true. And and remember, like, I don't think COPA's wrong, right? But like many of the rules we put into place for protection of children, it's just a really broad brush we end up painting these factors. And by the way, COPA was created well before there was a YouTube. So it's a different world that we're living in. And by the way, a lot of children's content is only YouTube from traditional makers of children's content as well, because that platform is a more sustainable platform than trying to find time on broadcast television.
And if folks are not able to monetize, is that going to change the formula for who wants to go ahead and put their stuff, out there on YouTube? And are we going to see, what does that do for music videos, right? And are they going to be using data to say, hey, look, X% of the viewers of Gangnam Style are, teens. Therefore, you've created for youth and you can't monetize. It's going to be pretty interesting to see what happens with this. And I'd also connect that to the classroom. I've done this a little bit with my students this year. Who are the YouTubers you're watching? Do you watch YouTube? Not everybody does, but checking these folks out, having conversations about them, right? We live in a different day where there's, so many different channels of content. And I think in a lot of homes, the adults may be very unaware of some of the main, perhaps, influencers in the lives of the teens living under the same roof, because they're not watching broadcast television. They're watching YouTubers. And if we don't have conversations about those kind of things and ask to see and talk with, there's really important conversations to have there, from a media literacy standpoint, in terms of the degree to which those folks, may be influencing, they are influencing, kids. there's a lot of good things to talk about there. So we are a little bit past the hour. We need to geek of the week it. I'll go really quickly. I've already mentioned the science behind Pixar. My second one is on my wish list for Santa. It is the YubiKey 5CI dual connector, USB-C and Lightning, $70 smart key. And so this is a physical key which can plug into a USB device like my MacBook Pro laptop. I think I mentioned this, but I've got a new case for it. I'm sporting the iPhone 7. I have regressed and passed that nice 11 Pro on to a child in our family. But with the Lightning connector, there's rumors, right, that some future generation of the iPhone may go USB-C. But you don't have to have a Bluetooth or other kind of wireless connection to do two-factor authentication. So with this $70 security device, I could turn off SMS, which is not a secure way, by the way, to handle two-factor for certain accounts like Google accounts. And this physical key, I would have to plug in to the computer, to the phone, to the tablet, and that would be how I would authenticate. So I am toying with the idea of going extreme, because that is a pretty extreme way to go, but it's what Google has done, and they report they have not had any phishing attack breaches since they required all of their employees to use physical security keys. So, your Geek of the Week, sir.
This is a quick one. If you're a current or former Audible customer, you should check your email to see if you've been offered any free books based on a settlement over some confusion over the expiration of credits. I will say the credits aren't universal. They don't get any book in Audible, but I was able to find 3 interesting books that I added to my Audible library. I was offered 3 credits in the settlement. And even if you were a customer, you're not anymore, and you qualified for the credit, you can still get those 3 free audio books. So I saw the article, I typed the word Audible into Gmail, there was the email, I was able to get those credits.
Cool. I just searched mine, and I'm eligible for 1 free title. So
there you go.
When you're not here, Jason, where can people learn along with you?
I am on the Twitters at Tech Savvy Teach, and I also work with the Northwest Council for Computer Education, www.ncce.org.
And I'm W. Fryer on Twitter. My blog is speedofcreativity.org, and my curriculum site is mdtech.cassidy.org. You can find those links as well as links to all of the articles and resources we talked about in tonight's show on our website, edtechsr.com. You can also download small 32 kilobit audio versions and 320p video versions, or you can subscribe to us on YouTube. Please follow us on Twitter at EdTechSR. We should be back next week for our special holiday gift-giving show. If you've got any suggestions for holiday gift items we should include, you can reach out on Twitter to Jason or I. You can use our hashtag EdTechSR. We will hopefully see any of those messages that you might want to send. If you'd really like to be old school, you can go to wesfryer.com/contact, and I'll get that as an email. And I'm sure, Jason, that you would love to receive more email. But anyway, Twitter is probably our preferred mechanism for getting us links. So until next time, we encourage you to stay savvy, stay safe. Thanks for listening to the EdTech Situation Room. We look forward to catching you again sometime soon.
Good night.